In the previous lesson, we have implemented automatic page scrolling to the current timeline item. But for now, automatic scrolling only works on the initial page load. And if, for example, we're gonna try to switch to a different page, then come back to a timeline page, in this case, we will see that our page wasn't scrolled to the current timeline item. So we need to find a way to detect when we switch between pages. And for example, when we navigate to the page with the name timeline, we should run the logic to automatically scroll the page to the current timeline item. So right now our application has 3 different pages, and these pages are represented by individual Vue components. First page is represented by the timeline component, second page by the activities component, and finally third page is represented by the progress component. And we already have one reactive variable called current page within root component, which stores current page name and is modified every time when we switch between pages. And in the previous lesson we have implemented automatic scrolling behavior within the timeline component. So we need to let this component know what page we're currently at. And we can do this by passing additional prop to this component with the name current page, like this. And here we're passing value of the reactive variable called current page, which stores current page name. So let's go ahead and add another property with the name current page in here. We're going to make this property required with the type of string, and validation function will be isPageValid. Now let's scroll up and import this validation function from validators module. And since we're going to reference our props within script section, let's just store all the properties within props constant by assigning the result of execution define props macro to this constant. And now let's recall how we have implemented automatic scrolling behavior to the current timeline item in the previous lesson. And for this we have created local function with the name scroll to current timeline item, which is called after current Vue component will be fully rendered on the page. And as we know, if we have to execute some code after component is fully ready, for this we use onMounted hook and pass the function that we need to execute after component is fully mounted as a first parameter to this onMounted hook. But now, since we will also need to scroll the page to the current timeline item not only on the initial page load, but also if we are navigating to timeline page from another page. So right here let's use a condition and check if our current page that we received as a prop current page equals to timeline. Only in this case we're supposed to scroll the page to the current timeline item. And of course in this case we can no longer use onMounted hook, because besides initial page load we're also going to trigger this scrolling behavior when we're navigating to timeline page from another page. And just because of this, onMounted hook is not going to work. So we'll use another function provided by Vue called watchEffect. And this function is basically going to trigger the closure that we're passing within this function every time one of the reactive dependencies used within this closure will be changed. So in this particular case, we're using only one reactive dependency, which is current page prop. And this variable's value changes every time we navigate between pages. So watchEffect will be able to detect page change and rerun this callback. But in this particular case, we need variation of the watchEffect function, and it's called watchPostEffect. And the difference between these two is that watchEffect is gonna rerun callback before Vue will re-render component based on updated values of reactive variables, and watchPostEffect is going to run the callback after Vue updates DOM structure based on new values of reactive variables. So now let's scroll up and import watchPostEffect function from Vue package. And just to be able to visually see what is going on in here, we're going to place here arbitrary console log statements within this closure, and the second one within this if conditional. And also let's not forget an import page timeline constant from constants module. After that, we're ready to check it in a browser. Let's go ahead and do so. So after initial page load, in the console we will see one log page changed. This is the result of executing that function we passed to watchPostEffect function. And further, if we're gonna navigate between different pages, we will see that this log gets printed over and over again every time we change page. But in addition to that, if we're gonna navigate to the page called timeline besides page change the log, we're also going to see another log, which we have placed earlier within conditional. So only in this case, when we navigate to a timeline page, we're going to run the logic to scroll the page to the current timeline item. But even now it does not work as expected, and when I try to navigate to timeline page from another page, I see that the scrolling doesn't work and the current timeline item is not in the viewport. So let's go back to the editor and debug it a little bit. In here I'm gonna place debugger statement, and let's see what is going to happen when I try to navigate to timeline page. The execution is currently stopped at that breakpoint, and we may notice that at the moment, Vue wasn't able to update DOM structure and show interface of the timeline page. And that's a problem because right after we're trying to scroll the page to the current timeline item. But in fact, at this stage, DOM elements responsible for showing timeline items are not even rendered on the page, because our current page is still activities, as we can see when we stopped at the debugger, and only after the function, which is supposed to scroll the page to the current timeline item, has run, Vue finishes updating the interface and shows new timeline page. And now that we know the problem, we need to somehow tell Vue to wait until it's able to update the interface and render new page before it goes ahead and tries to scroll the page to the current timeline item. And to run some code only after when Vue finishes updating DOM based on new reactive variable values, we can use already familiar function with the name next tick. And since this is asynchronous function, we're using await keyword, and of course await keyword is used in pair with another keyword async. Let's use this keyword in front of this closure. And before checking it out in the browser, let's scroll up and import next tick function from the Vue package, switch over to the browser. And now when I try to do the same thing, specifically going from activities page to timeline page, this time I see that at the point in time when we stopped at the breakpoint, because of deferring execution process by using next tick function, Vue was able to fully update the interface and render new page that we're trying to navigate to, which is timeline page. So this time we're safe to execute the function which is going to scroll the page to the current timeline item, and everything should work fine in this case, because this time all timeline item elements are present in a DOM, and we can freely scroll to any timeline item element. As we can see, after resuming execution, the page was successfully scrolled to the current timeline item. So now that it's working, let's go back to the editor and remove extra statements, such as console log statements, as well as this debugger statement. And now anytime we're going to navigate to timeline page from another page, the page will be always scrolled to the current timeline item,